2020 was destined to be an Olympic year, and although that didn't happen, we were interested to look at the role of technology in performance sport. Steve Haake of Sheffield Hallam University was our guest, and with 30 years of experience in performance sport engineering, he was responsible for setting up the Sports Engineering Centre at Sheffield Hallam University. In this webinar, Steve took us on a journey from the first Olympics, rather fittingly, right up to the present day, and looking at how materials, design and data are the main components that can affect performance and can be enhanced by technology. And he took us through a varying range of sports, ranging from cycling, swimming, racket sports, running, and even a little bit for those mere mortals among us who are involved in the weekly park run. So keep watching to see the very fascinating talk that Steve gave us, and he also demonstrated various pieces of equipment that he and his team have developed over the years, and answered that really searching question: is it cheating? And Steve very deftly answers that question later on in the video, along with other questions that were put to him by the audience on the night.
Advantage play, the impact of engineering and technology on sport. As I just said, isn't it just cheating is the most common question I ever get asked. If you do want to ask that, think of a different way of asking it, but I'm happy to answer any questions on that. So I've been doing this for 30 years or so, and I want to tell you a little bit about some of the things that I've learned on the way. So this is my new research centre that's just been built in Sheffield, just opened just as the COVID pandemic hit, so it's shut down again. We have all the technology into sport, but also into health. So we're looking at crossover between sport and health. So just so you know, I don't just work on sport alone. There's inside one of the labs, and my wife saw this picture over my shoulder and said, "What is that?" So what we have down here is we have a crash test dummy down there. So there's a crash test dummy lying on the floor. And here we've got two people playing simulated rugby. We've got someone with some studs in there, and we're measuring the forces and the accelerations in that crash test dummy as they do a ruck. And we're doing some filming with some cameras over here. So there's the lights, and there's the cameras, and there's the operator. And this is a piece of work we were doing for the Rugby Football Union, looking at stud design and looking at the rules of studs, because there are some very specific specifications for those. So that's one of the kind of thing that we get into, really interesting stuff and really quite difficult experiments to do. Having worked in this for many years, one of the key questions I ask myself again and again is, can we actually use technology to improve performance? And there's two parts to that question. And what technologies do we use, and do they work? So, I've spent a lifetime or half a lifetime working in this, and it'd be really nice to know that I haven't just wasted my time. So those are the questions I'd like to be able to answer tonight. And I wrote a book about all of this and about the biography of technology in sport and history. So there's the book. And my publisher, my agent, suggested the title Advantage Play. And I must admit, I didn't know what it meant. It's a gambling metaphor, advantage play. Now, it's a noun, a method of gaining a legal advantage during gambling. For instance, wearing sunglasses while playing poker. So really, it's about cheating, but not cheating. It's cheating within the rules. It's doing anything you can to gain an advantage. So, of course, you can wear sunglasses while you're playing poker. There's Kim Kardashian wearing sunglasses, but of course, she's chosen the wrong pair because they are mirrored sunglasses. So as soon as she's got in her hand. So you've got to be a bit careful about the technologies and how you use them. So I thought I'd go back to what I think is the very first sports technology. So I thought I'd go back to the very first sports technology. What was the first technology that I could find? And I have to go back to ancient Greece. And we're talking about 700 BC onwards. And here is a beautiful stadium out in a place called Nemea. This is in the Peloponnese in Greece. And there it's looking fairly static and beautiful. And you've got these sills around the outside, and you've got a sill across here, which is the starting line for this track here. This is what it looks like when it's actually in use. And what you can see there is you can see we've got a lot of people, some dressed in these white chitons. We've got the starting gate here. We've got lines marked out, 12 lines, and they're doing what is called the sprint, the stad. So the name for the sprint was the stad, and it was 600 ancient Greek feet long. And because feet would vary in size between places, the stadiums are all different lengths because it depended who measured the feet out. So this is 600 feet long. Actually, it's lost a bit of the end because someone's farmed over it. And I'll just tell you a little bit about technology of this stadium. And this is an event that actually held every Olympics now. And you can go and watch this. And I've taken part in this. It's a lot of fun. And one of the first things that you see when you enter the stadium is this wonderful tunnel. This is the old tunnel that they found. It was all blocked up. And they opened it up, and it was a perfect tunnel that you'd enter through, just like you do in an athletic stadium today, you know, when the athletes come in, or in a football stadium, the footballers come in. And as you come in, you see little bits of graffiti on the walls as you come through that particular tunnel. And I must admit, I thought it was new graffiti, but I was told by the archaeologists this is actually original graffiti. This is over 2,500 years old, this graffiti, and apparently that says, I'm going to have to read this, acro. So someone's been scribbling about some of his favourite athletes, and on the other side of the wall it says, Nico, I win. So even then you had people waiting in the tunnel, waiting to go out and scribbling little graffiti in there while they were waiting. And when you come out to this sill, and you see that it's not just a curbstone, actually, this is something for the water. So this is a water channel, and you have some little areas here where the water congregates, so the spectators can come down and take some water in the heat of the day, and it's fed by a spring at the end. It goes all the way around the stadium. And then as you go up to this top end here, you come across this starting line. Now, it's not just a scribed starting line, it's actually a marble sill. So this is a marble sill with two lines coming all the way across it. And the idea is that you put your toes in those lines and stand with your feet in those, and that's how you're supposed to start. Literally towing the line, that's where the saying comes from. Now, we've got some blocks of wood here, and these are the starting gates that I watched them put together for this particular event. And they're the original design that someone's found out in 10 years of worth of research to find out this particular design for this particular starting gate. And here we have on the right hand side, there's a big hole here, and someone starts to put these wedges in here, and in those wedges they've got a rather large post in there, a very solid post that slots into here. Now, coming through one of these blocks of wood are some ropes. This would originally have been sinew and hair, very twisty, and this forms a catapult, and the catapult was invented about 300 BC and was immediately used for these starting gates. So if I move on, there's the old guys putting it all together, and I love watching Greek guys work because they all kind of shout at each other. It sounds like they're arguing, but they're not. They're all agreeing with each other, but it's quite vociferous. And so they're talking about how this thing goes together. And you can see they've put a post through one of the loops of this rope here, and they've started to pull this up. It'll go against the twist, and it'll automatically try to pull back down like a catapult. So here you can see it's been pulled up. There's an identical one on the other side of the lanes on the other side, and here you've got some ropes that are going across to the other catapult in front of where the athletes will stand. Each lane has a little post in it, set into some square holes. And again, these square holes, they were lead lined, and they'd fill them with water, wet these posts, and then the posts would swell and produce an interference fit, so they couldn't pop out. So then you've got these posts, and they're held up by just a very little tiny catch here. And if I just show you, here's a close-up. All it is a nail in the end of the post. There's a ring that fits over that nail, and it just holds onto this nail over here. And this is the starter, he's got a bit of rope. He's just going to tug that bit of rope. That bit of rope will, that bit of rope, start again, that bit of rope will go that way. This little peg will go that way, and then this catapult will go that way. So here you can see, the starter ropes going back. Here they are going to just about to pull the catapult up. Here are athletes all lining up with towing the line. This is a slave with a large stick, with that stick to whip them with to make sure they do the right thing. So there's the gate, it's gone up, the catch is on, there is the judge. He's also got a stick. If there's any false start, he will whip them if there's a false start, guaranteed to stop people doing that. Then someone shouts out, ready, steady, go in Greek, and there you go. The catapult comes down and away they go. So that's the first piece of sports technology that I could find in the world that was used primarily just for performance. And they were obsessed with this starting line that the Greeks and then the Romans created over the 1,000 years that was the Olympic Games. Moving quickly on, that was the very first event, and the Stade was literally the only event that lasted for many, many years. Then they decided to have not just a sprint of one length, but a sprint there and back. And then they started to have the long race where they do loops. And then they created these individual races. And here, this is a long jumper being trained by a coach, again, with the requisite stick to whip them with to get it wrong. But you can see what's interesting is they've got these weights in their hands. Very interesting that they've got weights. And here are some of the weights. Here's a 5th century version. They're in the British Museum. So if you live in Britain, next time you go down to London, pop into the British Museum, you can see those. This is also in the British Museum. So this is about 600-700 years later. And this is a rock version. And I'll just show you, I've got some here that a friend of mine at work said, oh, I created some of those. I created this brand new way of doing weights. And he'd actually created this. So he's created some weights, he put them in a mold, made them the shape of his hand, and was actually using these to do weights in. So here you've got a set, and what's interesting, let me show you how they would do the long jump. And it wasn't actually a running jump. How it worked is it was a standing jump. And so what they do is they'd swing their arms like this, right? This is where something might fall off my shelves. I hope I don't break a thing because I think my wife will be very upset. So here we go. I shake my hands and I go like this. Whoa! And you know that's what you do when you jump. You throw your arms out, and actually what you do, you throw your arms out, but when you pull them back, it increases the force of the takeoff from your feet. So if you add some weights onto there, you increase this force and you can increase the jump. So now what's very interesting is there were these different versions, and some versions were still in existence at the same time, and so made out of cardboard just to show you. And this is how you would have held this one. So what's interesting is what we're using is the principle of moment of inertia, and the rotational moment of inertia starts around the shoulder when you swing your arms like that. So if you add a weight in there, it increases the moment of inertia of your arm, and that's what happens. That transfer of momentum is applied to your feet. But interesting, these versions here, they're slightly longer. So when you swing them like that, they're a little bit longer. And the moment of inertia is the mass times the length squared. So you're just increasing that length just a little bit with that mass hanging down a little bit. So the ancient Greeks obviously had some idea about design. And what I find really interesting is that some of these examples appeared at the same time. So people were choosing this sports technology, even in ancient Greece, so they could win. If we fast forward to the modern Olympics, again in Greece though, the very first Olympics was in Athens in 1896. Here you see the very first 100-meter sprint in the modern Olympics. And you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sprinters there in the final. Again, they've got their lines marked out by string, which seems a bit odd. You know, you think you might catch your feet in that. And they've got a variety of styles of starting. Now, you saw in the ancient Greeks, they started by standing with their arms out and towing the line. I wonder if you can guess which person won this particular event. It's this guy here, this guy, the one doing the modern stand. He's kind of almost down, crouching. He's going to push off with his feet. All these guys are at a severe disadvantage. And he's got the right style. Thomas Burke did it in 11 seconds. A bit slow because it was a shingle track. It wasn't the most bedded in track. Let's fast forward 12. This is what you see, and look, isn't that beautiful? Look at all these athletes setting off, pushing off from these traps here, effectively, these modern equivalents of a starting gate. So you've got two things to push off against. Interesting, here's the patents by Swiss Timing for those starting gates. And here you've got a little loudspeaker, because one of the things, these are such good athletes and they can start so well that with a starting pistol, the amount of time it takes for the sound to get from the pistol to the athlete is quite significant in terms of the reaction time. So if the pistol's over here, this person here is going to have an advantage compared to this person. So there is no pistol now. There's only a sound of a pistol, and everyone has their very own loudspeaker behind them there. And these foot pads have electronics in them. They have strain gauges in them. So if anyone moves within 0.1 of a second, then there's a false start and they're thrown out of the event. They don't get whipped though, so that's good. If we look at results over the last 120 years or so, since the beginning of the Olympic Games, for the 100 meters sprint, the men's 100 meters sprint, here you've got time up the side from 9 to 12 seconds. And here's the date from 1880 all the way up to today. And I've got two sets of dots on there. These are the best times in that year, not world records, but there's best time in each year. And these are the averages of the top 25 in the year. And so what's interesting is, okay, we see that the times have dropped from about 11 seconds to less than 10 seconds. And here is Usain Bolt's best time of 9.58 seconds at the World Championships. And what you do see is you see times get worse during times of war. There's the First World War, that's the Second World War. But the only piece of technology that I could find that had any fully automated timing. So fully automated timing when they had those instrumented modern starting gates and a laser at the end. So fully automated timing was the only thing I could see. And what happened was times actually got worse. So times went from about just over 10 seconds to about 10.24 seconds. So they went up by a quarter of a second. So it was like they had an extra 2 meters to run. So what was going on there? We improved the event by improving the technology, but actually made times worse. And what it was effectively, it's the starting time, the reaction time of the judge to press in the button on the original stopwatches, the mechanical stopwatches that they used to have. And because it'd go ready, steady, go, click, the times were shorter. At the end, it's quite easy to see someone going across the line at the end and click. But the start, you've got to have really good reactions to get them right on the bang of the gun. Whereas now, with electronics, we can do it exactly. So actually, interestingly, technology actually made performance worse in this case, but we can see the effect of technology there. If we go on to modern sports technology, so there we have Venus Williams, and she's got a Wilson tennis racket. She's holding it in a very strange kind of way. And I'll just tell you a little bit about kind of the tactile technology that's appeared over the last 120 years or so. Tennis is a really, really old sport. It goes back to the 15th century. Here you have an engraving of the game in Paris. It used to be an outdoor sport. These were the cloisters of abbeys. This is where the monks would walk around the abbey, and this would all be open, and hence this kind of funny roof here. And they started to play tennis. They'd loop a bit of rope across between the cloisters and start batting a ball. And then they had a glove with a bat on it, and then they had a bat, and then they had a racket. This is a modern equivalent of that. Actually, I say modern. This is Hampton Court. This is King Henry VIII's real tennis court. Obviously, it's been well looked after. And this is a tournament. These are two players playing. You can just see the ball coming across there. It's quite a slow game. You can see there he's done a very technical shot, and this guy's going to try and get this ball. And it rebounds off the walls. You can use the roof, and the rules are really, really complex. So that was tennis up to about 1865, 66, something like that. And that was the racket that they would use. You can see it's slightly angled because you had to try and get the ball out the corners. So it was basically wood. It was usually ash, and you'd have a strip of wood. It would go round in a loop. You'd steam it, put it round a loop, drill some holes through it, and put some gut strings through there. And that was the 1870s. By the time you get to the 1880s, Major Clopton Wingfield, a fantastic name, has invented the game of lawn tennis. He said, let's take tennis outdoors, and we'll use the lawns of the middle classes, because that was a burgeoning idea amongst the middle classes of Britain. Let's use those lawns to play tennis on. And here you can see in 1885, this fantastic painting by John Lavery of a group playing tennis. I can't imagine it was too competitive, not when you're wearing this kind of dress and a bustle. I think he might have a significant advantage. I don't think that's very fair. But anyway, so that was the game in the 1880s. And it evolved quite rapidly over the years. Here you can see some tennis rackets and how tennis rackets kind of grew in size. So here we've got an old wooden tennis racket, and here we've got a racket. It's called a Dunlop Max Ply. I happen to have one here. This is one I used to play with. So I am old enough that I learned to play with a wooden tennis racket. So it's quite flexible, gut strings, quite a small head. Do you know what? It's really difficult to hit a ball with this. I've tried it recently. Trying to get the ball back is really, really hard. You seem to hit the frame an awful lot. And when we got to 1976, Howard Head put out a patent. And what he did, he said, if I make a larger tennis racket, then I can make sure that people hit the sweet spot. And the sweet spot is in the center of the racket. And what we mean by the sweet spot, if I hold this tennis racket again so you can see it in the light, if I hold this tennis racket, if a ball comes in and hits the racket, it does two things. It moves backwards, and also it rotates. Tennis racket, as you hit the racket there, if you combine the movement backwards and the rotation, then actually what happens, there's a place where you can hit it on the racket where there's no impulse at the hand. And that's called the center of percussion. So it's about here. It's quite low down, not really near the center of the racket. It's quite low down. So if you hit it here, then you've got this and you've got this. And so that bit moves backwards that way, so you don't get an impulse at the hand. And what Howard Head did is he realized that if he just made the racket a lot bigger, then that center of percussion would be near the center. And he effectively patented the sweet spot. And here we have a modern tennis racket, and you can see the difference in size between the two there. Now, the modern tennis rackets, this larger racket, had a number of effects on the game. And so when I learned to play with the wooden tennis racket, okay, I was taught to step into the shot and do it like this. So I'd step into the shot and I would almost face with my back to the other player and step into it and swing like that. And then I have to turn all the way around and I'll do my backhand and I'll do it this way. These lighter tennis rackets, so although they were bigger, they were made of different materials. They were made out of carbon fibre, aluminium, glass fibre. They were a lot lighter, which allowed you to make them bigger. And what happened then is the players started to swat the ball like this. So they play a very open stance and play like this. One of the other outcomes was the moment of inertia. So we talked about moment of inertia earlier on, and with something that rotates, you have a moment of inertia, and I said before, it's the mass times the length squared. So the distance away, length squared. This has a higher moment So if you hit this off center, it's less likely to twist in your hand. And I told you that I would hit the frame a lot here, but when I did hit it off center, the ball would just go everywhere and it wouldn't go across the net. With this one, you're much more likely to get this across the net because the polar moment of inertia is bigger. There's another moment of inertia as well, which is this one. This is what tennis players call the swing weight. And this increased slightly as well, although the mass going down meant that it actually went down again and it was easier to swing. So let's just look at some data to see what happened. So what actually happened over the years was, this is the mass of all the rackets. So this is an experiment that we did. Luca Tabarelli went down to the Wimbledon Museum. He looked at all the rackets he could find going right back to the 1870s. And he measured all sorts of things on them. So here's the mass. And the mass stayed about 350 grams until we got to the 1960s, 1970s. And carbon fiber was invented. And carbon fiber meant that you could make these larger rackets and you could make them lighter and you could make them all sorts of different shapes, although they tend to have the same shape. But you could make them lighter. And that's what happened. So they became lighter, although it did start to go a little bit heavier again. Then we have this thing. This is the moment of inertia. This is this moment of inertia, the swing weight. And you can see it started to go up a little bit, but then it went down. So much easier to swing. That's what this is saying. There's the polar moment of inertia, much more difficult to twist in your hand. So the moment of inertia is going up. So that was the main outcome. And the other main outcome is that carbon fiber became very prevalent in all sorts of sports. Carbon fiber was used for anything and everything. I'd like to just say a little bit about fluid dynamics, because that's really flies through the air or goes through the water, it is subject to drag of some sort. So aerodynamic drag or hydrodynamic drag. And if we go back to the beginning, well, that's what people used to swim in. So that's what the women used to swim in. It was basically underclothes. So you can see that we've got some of these leggings called bloomers. You've got these small dresses, mostly covered up. And it was only until this amazing lady came along. She was called Annette Kellerman, and she was an Australian, lived in Sydney. She had rickets when she was young, and she took up swimming to improve the strength of her legs on the advice of her doctor. And she became this amazing swimmer. And she was doing diving events on stage during stage plays. And she was swimming across large creeks and all sorts of things. And she came to London and swam the Thames, tried to swim the English Channel a few times. And she wore a swimsuit eventually that looked like this. She had a kind of a half-cut swimsuit, but because it really wasn't done to show your ankles, she created this full-body swimsuit, and we'll come back to that. So that was the starting point for modern swimsuits. That was about 1901, 1902. By 1908, this is the British relay team for the Olympic Games in London. And you can see they're slightly see-through, and the reason that is because they're silk. Because these swimsuits were made out of wool, and of course wool absorbs water, and they get very, very heavy. They can weigh a couple of kilograms when they're full of water. These would not absorb water, but one of the disadvantages would they become slightly see-through. And I love the look of on the face of the chaperone here, following these girls around and scowling at any man that might look at them. So these were the early modern swimsuits, but again, not too tightly fitting. You can see they're kind of slightly ruffled and would cause extra drag through. By the 1970s and 80s, swimmers had decided that no swimsuits was better than swimsuits. So they try and cut away everything. And one advantage was that Lycra was invented. So here we got Dara Torres wearing a Lycra suit. Here we got Mark Spitz just wearing those Speedos, his Stars and Stripes Speedos, which was his trademark. He won 7 gold medals in the 1972 Olympics. Someone put me right in the chat. Here we got Dara Torres. She swam until she was 41 at the Olympics. And this was the style in the 1980s. And things changed quite quickly after that. by the time we got to Sydney in 2000, some of you may remember Ian Thorpe here. You can see they've got a variety of different swimsuits. So this guy's got a full body swimsuit, but with his arms are free. I think this guy's just actually pulled his swimsuit down, but Ian Thorpe had the swimsuit all the way down to his hands and all the way down to his feet, almost like Annette Kellerman, his compatriot from 100 years ago. And then in 2000, by 2004, we had this swimsuit, Michael Phelps. So these swimsuits were just made of Lycra. But they realized, Speedo realized, that if you made part of these swimsuits out of a hydrophobic material, effectively polyurethane, then you could improve the drag on these swimsuits. So the dark bits are the Lycra, which are stretchy, and then these are the polyurethane swimsuits. And this is what came out in 2008. And then records started to tumble. And people got really, really worried because records being broken in every single event. This is some footage. I'm sorry, it was a video, but the videos don't really work on Zoom, so I've put it into slides. So this is someone in a swimming treadmill. So you've got water coming in from one end, it gets forced to the other end by a big propeller, and then you have to swim to keep stationary. So you've got someone who's just dived in here. So in terms of the drag, what you can see is there's very little going on around the hands there, and she's got her hands clasped together and she's slicing through that water, and you can just start to see some bubbles starting to appear, and that's the drag, that's the bluff drag. The larger this wake, the larger the drag, so you want to keep that as minimal as possible. So if I move her on just a little bit, again, she's just starting to surface, but you can see that this is very, very shiny, and that tells you that this is hydrophobic. This is a hydrophobic material. And what it means is, so when anything flows through a fluid, the bit of fluid right in contact with the body is stationary, and you drag it along with you. Now, if the material is not hydrophobic, that skin friction can be quite large, can be quite thick, and you're dragging a lot of water with you, and that causes drag. But if you make it hydrophobic, you don't do that. So here you can see her swimming. This is an arena swimsuit, and again, you can see there's hardly any drag coming off her there. So what happened was in 2009, people like Arena and Speedo and Mizuno and Adidas created these suits. This is the X-Glide, and you can see the water just shimmering off this guy. This is Paul Biedermann. He's a German record holder. And what's happened here is he's wearing a full polyurethane suit. So there's only a very small amount of Lycra. So if a little bit of polyurethane is good, then all polyurethane is going to be really good. And that was the case. And he beat Michael Phelps in the 2009 World Championships. This is Michael Phelps looking daggers at the result. He beat him by 2, absolutely enormous. And here you can see some of the results. So we've got speed in kilometers an hour. We've got the different events. We've got the 50 meters freestyle, 100 meters freestyle, 200, 400, 800, 1500. And we've got the time here. And what you can see here is you've got 2008, what have we got? 9, 2010. And you've got this amazing trajectory of results. In the 100 meters, it's not quite so much. 200 meters, quite so much. 400 meters, not quite so much. And as you go further, you don't get quite so much of an effect. And if anyone wants to ask me why later, I will explain it. But what happened is in 2010, FINA, the world body, said, right, enough is enough. We're going to ban those suits. So they banned the suits. They went back to short suits. They could only be a woven textile. They couldn't be a material like polyurethane anymore. And what you can see is the previous trend prior to this blip just continuing. But some of these amazing results have still not been broken even today. So one thing that shows me is that technology really does have an effect. what you have to do is this balance between technology and tradition. And what we don't like is we don't like if things change too rapidly. Of course, fluid dynamics is just as important in something like cycling, particularly if you're cycling fast. Drag is proportional to the velocity squared, so the faster you go, the more important it becomes. And so this is a British athlete called Victoria Pendleton. She got lots and lots of medals, and we were lucky to work on her helmet. So this is her helmet, and we were asked what's going to be the best helmet for her to use during the Olympic Games. If I stick that on there, then you can see that what we've done, or what they've done, is possible. They've got covered up the eyes, and if I turn here, I can't. Hopefully, I'm in the middle there. So what you can see is that when she's on cruising position, she's like this, and you can see that this point is pointing right down the back and making the airflow go down along the back. Well, there was a slight issue with it, that when she was starting off, when you're starting off from a standing start, you tend to look down at your feet, and this thing sticks up in the air. You push, you push, you push on the pedals. And this actually makes drag worse. So that makes it better, that makes it worse. So I'll just take that off again. Thank you. And show you, again, these were videos, but I've had to just turn them into slides. So this is some aerodynamics that we did of the flow going over a helmet here. How we do this analysis, this is quite neat. We take a 3D scanner, we scan a real person, we scan the helmet, we put the whole thing together, we put it into a mesh, effectively made by a company called ANSYS Fluent, and it's computational fluid dynamics. And then we run this computer model, and this will have millions and millions and millions of tiny cells representing the airflow around a solid body. And it takes days and days and days and days and weeks to create the model. And then it will take a day overnight, or it did when we did this. This was back in 2008. Take a day to run the model and do the results. So there you can see the beautiful airflow going along the back of the athlete there. And here you can see a rather large wake going along the back there, showing how bad this actually is. And so what you see now is, for anyone that tends to keep their head looking down or looking around for some of the cycling events, they actually chop off here. You'll see some helmets that don't have that bit at all. They'll just cut that bit off, and you'll still get most of this effect. And usually that's for the sprint, where you've got to look over your shoulder at your competitors to see. We've also applied these aerodynamic techniques. There's a computational fluid dynamics simulation of some wheelchair work that we were doing, look at the biggest effects that we could come up with, how to improve wheelchair racing. This is quite a long time ago now, back in the early 2000s. And again, we've scanned an athlete, and we've scanned the whole wheelchair to see what goes on. And what we found, oh, hang on, sorry, I must have lost a slide. What we found is the majority of the effect was from the athlete, of course. But we had a significant effect from this front wheel, whatever was sticking out into the air. So these bits were about half as significant as the athletes. So we focused a lot of attention on this front end here. You might not be able to tell exactly what that is. Aerodynamics does come into all sports in various levels. This is actually a golf club. I don't know if you tell. That is a golf shaft. That is large head of a driver. And this is a beautiful image done by Dr. John Hart, who works at Sheffield University with me. And you can see the smoke flow afterwards. And here we have the golf club head. Now, golf club heads have got bigger and bigger over the last 20 years. So the drivers have anyway. And they're actually hollow. So they're made by investment casting. And as they've got bigger, we realized that aerodynamics was starting to become quite important, because aerodynamic drag, proportional to the velocity squared, as I said earlier, but also proportional to the cross-sectional area. So you've got cross-sectional area across this golf club getting really quite large. And so what we did is, you might just be able to see that we created this pattern here. These are called turbulators. that go across the top of this ping golf club. So when it swings through, it just reduces the drag, reduces the bluff drag around the back there. So that is Ping's best-selling golf club ever, and we're named on that patent, which is fun. I have to say, I didn't make a penny out of it. Anyway, so, oh, there's my slide. Sorry, I wonder where my slide went for my wheelchair athletes. I'm sorry about that. So there you go. So there's the amount of drag that comes off the athlete. And like I said, about half as much off this front end of the sled here and a bit off the wheels. So I'll move on quickly. So we've had at least one technological kind of journey, and that was the materials journey. From the 80s, where everything was made out of wood, to the modern day where things are made out of, you know, if they're golf clubs, it's things like titanium, but if it's helmets, they're made out of plastics of some sort. This is just literally plastic, but you might have them made out of carbon fiber. And again, tennis rackets, golf club shafts, a lot of carbon fiber knocking around. So that was one of the first technology transitions that I've seen in my lifetime. The second one was this, and it was literally the 1st of June 2008 when iPhone 1 came out. So here's the iPhone 1. Phones existed already, but this was different. This had a user interface like no other, and it started to have sensors inside as well. And our coaches started to ask us, can we use these devices to measure performance in situ out there in the field? Because prior to that, we'd had to do everything in the lab. Like the first picture I showed you, it had had to be in the lab. Whereas actually, we want to do that out in the field. You've got to do it in the place where the event is happening. So this is one of the first examples that we created. Hopefully you can see this. This video might be moving. It will stop. And this is one of the first apps that we created back in the kind of the 2000s for British swimming, the British diving team, in fact. And what we did is we set it to the wall and it would record automatically. And so you've got a diver on the 3-meter springboard here doing some amazing gymnastics. And when the diver goes into the water and comes out of that water, the coach will show a replay behind him on a very large screen. Again, going back 10 years, screens weren't that large. We bought a screen which cost about £10,000. It was the most expensive screen you'd ever seen. And the athlete would see a replay of the dive. The coach would then say, what I want you to do is I want you to do this better, I want you to do that better, please improve this, right, go and try it again. And if it was a really important dive, the coach would then send that particular clip to the athlete's phone so that they could talk about it later when they had a cup of cocoa in the cafe outside. And the other thing they could do was actually annotate the video as well. So it was really, really simple stuff. It was taking video on a screen. It was then putting it onto a phone. It was then annotating it on the phone and giving it to the athletes so they could take away the learning. But it really was a real change to the way things have been done, because prior to that, you needed a camera, a tripod, a laptop to download it. You had to do all sorts of complex software analysis. And this really, really did change the world. So fast forwarding a little bit, going back to tennis, we've done a lot of tennis over the years, but this is a nice example. So we've got Roland Garros here, and we were asked, okay, we want to track slips of tennis players. So we want you to record lots of tennis, and we want you to track those tennis players as they go across a tennis court, and we want to track where they go and their steps and so on. But you're only allowed to have one camera. Now, if you're in the know, doing it with one camera is really, really hard. You need lots of cameras normally to do that kind of thing. So there's our one camera at Roland Garros on our tripod. And it's a classic camcorder. That's the view from the camera. And then you've got two coordinate systems. You've got the real world coordinate system. So there's the X, the Y, and the Z. And you can see someone's just holding a rod there so we can find out where that is. And then you've got the picture. You've got this two-dimensional picture of the camera. And here you've got an X and a Y that's camera frame. And then you've got these arrows. These arrows are actually some subsequent analysis we've done showing where all the errors are. So the errors are least in the middle, and then you get lens effects around the outside, and you get the worst lens effects over the corners here. So what we've done here is we've created a pinhole model of the view. We've taken some parameters off the tennis court here, so we know where the tennis court is. So that's the real world plane. And we've converted the coordinates in the picture to the coordinates in the real world frame. And this is a plan view. Now, again, this would be a video, and this would be showing this player, this is Sampras, moving around a different court. And what we're tracking is center of mass there. So it's the pseudo center of mass. So we've got a little dot there. And all we're doing is we're tracking the blob that is the player from what we can see. But then we're also tracking the feet. And I can't tell you how we do that because that's a trade secret. But then what we do get is we get the movement of the player. So there's green bits here, which are now red, which I've just scribbled over. That's the movement of the player. And then you've got these crosses here, which are the steps. So we've got a single camera, and we've managed to a certain accuracy measure the track the player across the tennis court and the player's steps. And then we can just let it running. And when the player slips, we can go, okay, why did the player slip? What was the cause of it? Let's create some rules for the surfaces and the shoes. And that was a piece of work we did for the International Tennis Federation. But really interesting, that particular technology was really useful to use in other circumstances. So this is the World Championships. This is Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt is here. We got Tyson Gay here. We got Andre de Grasse down here. And what we're doing is we're just taking BBC footage, and we're starting to analyze BBC footage using that same tennis. And what we're looking at is we're trying to track the number of steps of each player and the step frequency. And these are two things that are very important to sprint coaches. So we're 10 steps in, so about 10 meters, not really, but about 10 meters. So you can see Andre de Grasse over here, he's taking 11 steps, about 5 hertz, 5 steps per second. Here's Usain Bolt, 10 steps, 4.6 hertz. He's slightly behind, and he's got a lower step rate. Here we've got, sorry, Justin Gatlin was the one I meant to look out, not Tyson Gay. Justin Gatlin, he's on 11 steps and 4.9. He's ahead at this point. So here we've got about halfway, 21 steps in for Usain Bolt. He's still behind. And just as we hit the line, he starts to cruise this last part. He does 41 steps. Gatlin does 43. He does a much lower step rate, 4.4. Because he's got longer legs, though, he actually goes faster. So this is the kind of information that coaches love and they can use to train their athletes. This was taken just from BBC footage. So there's no calibrations at all. You could literally just take this off the TV screen. And so this is a piece of technology we've been using elsewhere. And I'll show you elsewhere. So here is an example of it being used in a clinic. So this is in a clinic, an ear, nose and throat clinic, where the consultant looks at people who have balance issues. If you have balance issues, you generally have something wrong with your inner ear. And what the consultant does is the consultant asks someone just to walk up and down. Can you just walk up and down? And you can eyeball generally the footsteps and see if there's any asymmetry, see if there's something going wrong, see how long the footsteps are, how regular they are, that kind of thing. But he did actually say, is there a way of measuring this? And we took our Usain Bolt piece of technology and we applied it here in the local hospital. And if you look at patients, people who've got a problem, then their step length is usually about 600 millimeters. If you look at healthy people, step lengths are longer. They're about 700 more millimeters. This is just a pilot study that we did. If you look at the step frequency, if you look at healthy people, it's about 2 steps a second. If you look at patients, it's much higher. They're kind of shuffling along at a much higher frequency. And if you look at the speeds, the consequence of speed and step length, healthy patients actually go faster, 1200 millimeters a second, and patients go about, more than 1200, almost 1400, and patients go at 1200 millimeters per second. So what you can see here is we can immediately start to characterize what a healthy patient and an unhealthy patient looks like. And one of the tricks there, we're not even attaching anything, because you have this Heisenberg uncertainty principle of measurement in sport and performance. As soon as you attach something, as soon as you tell someone to do something that's out of the norm, then they'll do it differently. So you can't tell them even that you're taking the video. You say, can you just walk up and down? And they'll do that. So the future, a little bit of the present really, and into the future. So there of course is, anyone can tell me what that film is later. I'll be very impressed. So wearables. Wearables is the thing of the moment. And of course you've got watches. Here's a bit of a watch. You've got heart rate monitors. This is one of the most significant inventions of the last probably decade. So you can see I have my watch here. It looks kind of pretty normal. This has got a GPS in it. It's also got, I don't know if you can see, it's got some flashing lights. So those flashing lights around the back, they've just gone off. They look at the blood flow in my wrists and measure my heart rate. Before that came along, you had to wear a heart strap like this polar heart monitor here. And we've got all sorts of things coming up. This is a catapult system. This has accelerometers, GPS, and you can see these rugby players wearing them in their suits here. And we're measuring performance during a game. So if you watch a rugby game in the near future, a professional rugby game, you'll see the players wearing these, and you'll see the coaches sat with laptops all watching these athletes and watching the performance of these athletes on their laptops. And we're starting to move from the outside of the body to the inside. I suppose this is still the outside. This is a fluid measurement device, measures your sweat, and it is literally just a stick-on patch, and these things change colour and tell you when you're dehydrated. This is a mouth guard, but it's got some sensors in that mouth guard, and that's measuring the saliva and measuring, it's really important. The only way we can do it at the moment is to prick your thumb, get some blood out, stick it in a machine, wait for 30 seconds, and it comes out with a number. If they get this right, this particular lab, then they'll be measuring it consistently. Okay, you'll have to wear a mouth guard, but it'll be something really interesting in terms of performance. I'll just show you a little example of how you can use these sensors. Now, I did say, you know, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, if you put something on, people act differently. These are generally small enough that people don't really know they're there. You can stick that on the back and not know that it's there. So here's a catapult sensor. And what we've got here is some clever analysis applied to the sensor. What we've got is we've got some accelerometers in there, and we've done some double integrations to get this funny signal here. And this is actually someone that's running, an uninjured person running on a treadmill. And if you think about how you run, you do two things. You run up and down, but then you also go from side to side. So as you run, there you go, slightly exaggerated. As you run like this, you get this funny butterfly pattern appearing. And so if you are uninjured, then you get this neat pattern. So up, down, hit the floor, up, down, hit the floor, up, down, hit the floor. Here what you can see is you can see a football player with an ACL tear on their left leg. And you can see up, down, oh, ouch. And you can see this injury in the way that they're running. And here you've got someone who's got these injuries. I don't even know what these injuries are. They're just words to me. But you've got a very, very strange shape. And this is a footballer who's saying, I'm fine, coach, I can play, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me. Whereas actually, there is something wrong, there's something very wrong, unless they've always run like this. And so the trick there is to do baseline studies so that if they do get injured, you can do some measurements. And all this requires is one single sensor, really, really clever analyses. And we start to look at patterns and data rather than very specific numbers. So finishing off on data, this is one of my favorite things of all time, parkrun. So parkrun is an amazing event that's sadly not running at the moment because of COVID. This is my local event. It has about 800 people. doing a free 5-kilometre run or walk every Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. And you have the usual suspects. You have some kind of skinny blokes all looking at their watches, their wearables, sprinting off to get their best time ever. But actually what we've got normal people like you and me coming through here later. You got, friends running, you got mums and daughters, you got little kids, you got older guys at the back, and you've got people queuing up at the end to collect their results. Now, queuing is peculiarly British. If there was a gold medal for queuing, we would win it, definitely. And that's one of the reasons that Parkrun works. And how Parkrun works is we have this piece of technology which is called a barcode. And you register with the barcode. When you finish, you hand the barcode in, someone scans it, and you get your results on the website. And you collect them results. And I've done kind of, hundreds of these things. And you can see people here that have done hundreds, 50, 100, 148. You get your name on there, you get your time on there. And you compare yourself to other people. And it's this frugal use of technology, actually, that is important. The queuing forces socialization and improves the experience so that people come back again and again. So I think I just wanted to leave you with the idea that we shouldn't use technology always just because we can. There's an appropriate use of technology, and Parkrun shows us how to do that. And there we've got some of the numbers. This is the number of runners at various events over these dates and time. This is the biggest one. This is Bushy Park. They get about 1,000, or they did. This is 2,000. This is quite lots of data. So, time to finish. Oh, look at the clock. I'm a little bit late. So, can use technology to improve performance? Well, yes, we can. What technologies have we used? Materials was the first technology change that we saw. We're using an awful lot of wearables these days. We've used design and things like investment casting, etc. But also we've used data to improve performance now. Do they work? Yes, they do work. Phew, thank goodness for that, because I've been doing it for 30 years and I'd be really cross because that would be a complete waste of time. Finish off, like I said, I've got a book. There's a lot more in the book. Some of the stories I've told you tonight are in there. So if you do want a copy, go to your local bookshop, go to the usual place where you buy books, and it's there. Right, I will finish there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. That is a fantastic journey through everything from the very first Olympic and the gravel track that took us to the performance sport that we now hoped to have a lot of going on right now. But
sad, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, there we go. How do you think the lack of an Olympics will affect those trajectories of timings that you have been showing us? Will the athletes being out of sequence actually change the way that works?
No, it's really interesting because I was speaking to a long jumper and asking her the same question, how's it going to affect you? And she said, well, do you know what's going to happen is it's going to give us a level playing field, because what we're experiencing now, the issues we're having, can we get into our training venues? Can we see our coaches? Can we train with other people? They are some of the normal experiences for the majority of the sporting world. We are very insulated here. We have a very good Olympic system. We have good coaches. In the developed nations, we have a lot of money to spend on sport. If you go to somewhere like India, Africa, etc., Southeast Asia in some places, they struggle to get just facilities. So what she felt was it would probably level the playing field so that we might see some winners that you wouldn't ordinarily expect, which is going to be interesting.
Oh. Well, that is an interesting prospect, that the world rankings will get a big shake-up as a result of COVID.
Yeah.
So I leapt in with the first question rather greedily. We're going to hear some questions from the audience now. and three of my colleagues, Michael, Richard, and Samantha, are going to be putting Steve through his paces and grilling him with really different questions, depending on what you've asked. Just before we do that, one question that has come up that I can answer myself is, does this event qualify for CPD, continuing professional development? And the answer is yes. It's 1 hour of CPD if you're counting up your log of training hours. If you're in the IET and collecting CPD hours, you don't need to do anything other than note for your own purposes that you've taken part. However, if you would like a certificate, then we'll be giving details a bit later on of how you can get one of those. So Samantha, I think you've got the first question, is that right?
Yes, I do. Steve, can you see that question I've just put on?
Oh, hang on, I'm just looking on the questions and answers. So
just one I put on live, which is to do with to be involved in sports engineering, what university subjects do you recommend?
Oh, very, very good. Okay, to be involved in sports engineering. So if you want to go on to it as a career, then I thoroughly recommend that kind of a standard science route. I would say if you can take maths as far as you can take it, then that will give you some advantage over lots of other people. So people kind of go and do sports science, and sports science is about the athlete and can be a lot of psychology, etc., but with minimal maths, unless you're taking things like biomechanics and so on. But in terms of technology side, you do need the maths. So take maths, to A level, and then go and do a degree, and an engineering degree, a physics degree, a maths degree. So people I've employed have been people like mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, maths and engineering, physics, sports scientists. I have employed sports scientists as well. I have employed some sports psychologists. So what else? So that's about it, I think. Does that answer the question, do you think?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, Steve.
Great.
And Richard, have you got the next one?
Yeah, it's a great question here from Stuart. Obviously, we've seen an awful lot of improvements in sports like cycling and swimming with the technologies applied to them. So which do you think the next sport to significantly advance through technology and engineering will be, excluding Formula One, which after all is mostly technology with a little bit of sport attached to it?
Yeah, when I set up the Sports Engineering Journal, I said, no, we're not doing Formula One. That's something different. That's motorsports, So interesting. Which one are going to come next? Do you know, it's really interesting because sports are levelling off. All the old sports are levelling off in terms of performance. So you saw with the 100-metre sprint, it was coming down like that. And they're all asymptotic. They're all levelling off. We're reaching some kind of equilibrium for many of those sports. So actually, where you're going to see the technological changes very rapid are going to be the new sports. So I don't know if you know, but in the Olympic Games, we've got some new sports appearing: surfing, skateboarding, rock climbing, some weird and wonderful sports to most of us, where you will see, and I can't wait to work on surfboards. It's just going to be great. But, there's sports like that will change rapidly if those technological rules allow it of the sport. In terms of other sports, I don't think there's any one sport that will change. Carbon fiber is the one that changed everything overnight. Pole vault, javelin, etc. We're not seeing those kind of technical revolutions. I don't know where they're going to come from. Graphene is one that we're looking for, but really we haven't got materials made out of graphene yet that are cheap enough or copious enough to use in sport. I would say in terms of a technology that will be used, will be something called transcranial magnetic stimulation or direct stimulation. And this is basically, it looks like a set of headphones. Set of headphones, applies a voltage to the scalp. It works very well in your head, direct stimulation. And you apply a voltage to the motor cortex and it raises the potential of the neurons in your brain and allegedly improves your learning, improves the way that you do motor skills. And so these, you can buy them, they're $500 a pair, and athletes and teams are starting to use these. Of course, what you never hear is you never hear what the outcome was, but you hear about these teams winning medals, winning Olympic medals and so on. So there's things like that that are starting to appear, and they're not one sport, they're kind of all sports. So that's kind of interesting.
Michael, are you ready with the question?
Yep. The next one's in two sort of related parts, but how is the gender gap being handled in sports technology? So are researchers like yourself more aware, and is there an effort being made to narrow this gap? And related to that, as sports injury prevention and training techniques are studied, possibly predominantly in men, are women more likely to get injured and take longer to recover? And do you have examples of bad technology design that's happened because of this?
Yeah. So that's a really, really good question. And like a lot of things in this world, they've been male dominated, not just for, years, but for centuries and millennia. Going back to ancient Greeks where women weren't even allowed to take part. And we've seen that in the modern Olympics as well. So you're quite right. So many designs are based on men. And I wouldn't just say that's a disadvantageous for women. I'd also say that's disadvantageous to children as well, because we have lots of designs which are, we'll maybe reduce it in size a little bit for women and then we'll reduce it a lot more for children. That'd be fine and we'll sell it. And actually it just doesn't work like that. So there are moves afoot to make things specifically for men and women. And I think what's interesting about things like parkrun has more women participating now, signing up than men at the moment. I think that's just the case now. And women becoming more predominant in sport. So a good example is cycling saddles. And it's a problem that still hasn't really been solved. That actually you would think that saddles would be bad for men, but actually the worse for women. So they haven't really solved the problem of injury to your nether regions from cycling for women. And a lot of those female cyclists that you see that win medals, they've gone through a lot of pain to get there. You have to really admire. It's not really talked about, but they will go through a lot of pain to get there. And some women who can't even train because they're in such agony. So there's specific female related problems that we've not quite addressed yet, shall we say.
Steve, can I just ask something related to that from one of the attendees, and that was, you sort of answered it, but are there significant differences in the technologies that you've developed for men versus women? For example, did you have to make a different helmet for Victoria Pendleton compared to her male colleagues?
Well, yes, and actually where it comes down to it, so most at the elite level, most of these kind of things will be bespoke to the athlete person. They'll be fitted to them. So I've got a small head, so I know that Victoria Pendleton's head is about my size. So that's quite small. Obviously, you'd have bigger helmets for bigger athletes. And you're trying to, effectively what you're trying to do, with it's cycling really, what you're trying to do is you're trying to go, there's the athletes, right, let's put everything around them, let's get them in the optimum place, and we'll get the saddle, the handlebars, we'll get the pedals, we'll get the clothing and the helmet all sorted out for that individual so they become a system. So the answer is yes, we do things differently for men and women from that point of view, but actually we do things different for all individuals because they have to be bespoke.
Thanks, Steve. A question here from Tessa. I suspect it was a piece of clip art we used on the poster for this event. We showed a sailing boat on it. Do you have any comments you can make about technology in sailing? And I'll extend this question a little bit, because I have an interest in rowing, again, another water sport, which has got some other interesting challenges in the fluid dynamics sphere. So is there anything you can say about the complexities of those sports?
Yes. We have worked with sailing over the years, and in terms of the boats have been fairly well optimized over the years, and there are some events, and Tessa might know better than I do, or you might know better than I do, there are some sailing events, I think in the Olympics specifically, where the boat size is really, really well stipulated. I think some of them you even have to put them in a box, and if they don't fit in the box, you can't sail in it. So a lot of those technologies are fairly standardized. And again, in the early years, one of the things we did do, in the early years, we did a complete airflow analysis of the Athens Bay area for Athens, the Athens Olympics, where we looked at where the airflows would come down off the mountains to see where the dominant winds would be. For the coaching. So we did that prior to, I don't think anyone's ever done that, but that was quite exciting to do. So in terms of technology, where we've worked with sailing, it's mostly been on the kind of performance technology, the data, and they get copious amounts of data, wind directions and weather and positioning and so on, and how you incorporate that all together in a dashboard. So not so much the kind of the equipment, more the data. In terms of rowing, we've worked again on collecting data. We've also done things like the paddles, looking at the shapes of the paddles and so on, some really, really complex shapes. And when carbon fibers came out, you didn't just have to have a carefully sculpted wooden shape on the end of a straight stick, effectively. You could have these really complex shapes being created. So we did a little bit of work on that as well. I hope that answered your question, Tessa.
Great. Thank you for that. And another one that we've got is, does this kind of work translate into developments in, for example, orthopedics and prosthetics? Is there a lot of overlap that you can talk about in some examples?
Yes. I did have a video, but I couldn't show it, unfortunately. So in terms of Paralympics, so in terms of carbon fibers, if you a Paralympic runner that's maybe a below knee amputee or even above knee amputee, you'll see it's made out of a carbon fiber, and it's a bit of a J. And this J, and the idea is that as your leg goes down, this J compresses, absorbs some of the energy, and then returns that energy as the foot releases the pressure off the floor, and you get a better energy return from that than an able-bodied runner would ordinarily get. So, and the principles we use are exactly the same principles as we use for tennis rackets. What's the stiffness? What's the moment of inertia? How do you optimize it for the particular athlete? So exactly the same. So that's the prosthetic limbs. I do talk about it in the book if you want to, anybody wants to read about it. But also you can look it up. Just look up some videos and see what happens there.
Okay. The next question is, can you tell us about an engineering technical innovation that has increased the safety of the sport as well as performance?
Well as performance. Oh, blimey, that's a difficult one. Okay, we've got to do both things. Well, okay. There's a. I mean, helmets are always one, aren't they? And so certainly cricket. If you look at cricket helmets, and we've done all sorts of impact tests, and they've got these grills on the front as well of the cricket helmets. That you know what, if you're a fielder and you're worried about being hit in the face with a ball, you're going to perform very, very badly. If you get a helmet that you know is going to save your face and save your eyes and save your nose with these balls, it will improve your performance. So that's what I can think of where it improves performance and improves your safety. jump to rock climbing and climbing in general. And again, with safety gear, climbing changed from something 100 years ago, which was you do not fall. You do not fall, because if you fall, you're going to die. Okay, and that's what that was the mantra. Now what you have is you have this kind of sports climbing, which is how can I get up this really difficult route? And you'll try it again and again and again, and all the safety gear that you've got allows you to fall off repeatedly but safely. And you learn those techniques. And so now we've got these bouldering championships where, and again, you'll see at the Olympics next year, fantastic, so exciting, where you'll see somebody literally running up a wall. It seems like they're running vertically up a wall. They're going that fast. But they've honed those techniques because they've had these safety harnesses and things and been allowed to fall. So safety and performance. Phew, did I answer that? I hope that was an example.
That's a very good question that you fielded very well. So
that was the question of the night, that one. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, if only there were prizes.
Yes.
Just time for a couple more, I think. So one from Richard and one from Michael, and then I think we'll have to draw things to a conclusion.
No, thanks. I've got a good question here, Steve. I think a lot of the technology advances are sort of there to help the professionals, the elite sportsmen and women gain those marginal gains to get them to the top. What flow down is there from the technology in terms of helping teach ordinary people better technique, the sort of people who can't afford all these technological gizmos? If you get the technique right, that will help the grassroots level of the sports.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of those things. If you can't afford any technology, you can't afford any technology, and there's nothing there that you can't afford to buy it. You can't afford to have it. But if you can afford small amounts of money, then things like stopwatches, watches with heart rate monitor on. So a heart rate monitor is a fantastic device to know how well you are performing if you want to improve performance. So if you're a runner, then you can basically track your heart rate with the amount of effort you're putting in. And you can more or less work out where your blood lactate threshold is. And the blood lactate, when you're running, if you're sprinting, when your legs start to go dead, that's when the blood lactate is getting too great in your muscles, and your muscles are going acidic, and your legs go all a bit wobbly, and you go, oh, I can't run anymore. So if you can find when that starts to set in, and you can do that with heart rate, then you can prevent it happening, because you can go, look, I've got to monitor my heart rate, and I'm not going to go over a particular number. So I know when I'm doing a marathon, I don't go over 155 beats a minute, because I know that's my lactate threshold. And if I go above that, I'm going to die in another hour before the end of the marathon. So there's things like that. And again, there's a lot of information on the internet. So something as simple as a heart rate monitor can really help your performance. And at that stage, I think, getting advice from a coach is the thing that you'd really want. If you can get some free coach to work with coaching, then that's the way to do that.
And Michael, for the final question.
Yeah. So the final question is from Paul Cole. So he's asking, we've spoken about step changes in sports technology, but in terms of step changes in the actual research and techniques that you use, do you see artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques as potentially making a headway into your area and making real step changes there?
Yeah, I just lost the last bit of that question, but I think the question is basically, what about AI? How's that going to affect the research that we do? Was it Paul? Paul, it's a great question, really good question. Because of the copious amounts of data that we are getting, we're just about starting to get to that place where AI is becoming important. We haven't really been there before. We haven't really had enough athletes. When you talk about elite sport, when you actually condense it, you don't actually have that many athletes. So you have lots of data about individual athletes, but you don't have a lot of athletes to work with because you've only usually got your own team. So, but AI is starting to come in, or rather machine learning techniques in things like biomechanics, where you have lots of data coming in. And certainly in things like data from wearables, parkrun not necessarily, but Strava, Garmin, they've got so much data. They can start to tell themselves things and about our behavior, about the kind of things that we do. When do we go out? How much does the rain affect us going out? So should they give us a nudge on a rainy day? Do go out because we know that you're 10% less likely to go out. Those kind of things will start to appear. Great question.
Well, I think that was a fabulous question to end on. And lots of really good questions from the audience that elaborated and expanded on the presentation that Steve kindly gave us. I think everyone would agree it was whistle-stop tour through sports technology, and a real bonus to have the insight a little bit into your brain and the insight of many years having established the discipline and worked in it. I'm particularly intrigued by your idea that the next great thing is going to be surfing. I don't quite know how that's going to go in Sheffield, a long way from anything that's remotely like the sea. But good luck with that one anyway. In the meantime, Steve did mention earlier on that he has got a book out, which is called Advantage Play, and I'm sure it's available in all usual outlets. That will definitely be interesting if you want to delve further into it. So there's the advert over with.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Please buy it, otherwise my mum's not getting a Christmas present.
Yeah, mum needs a bungalow.
Yeah.
If we could have a round of applause now virtually, then we would certainly do that. Over Zoom, it's a little bit difficult. So on behalf of everyone, a virtual round of applause. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, everybody from around the world for listening. That's been great. Thank you.
Yeah, and indeed, you're right. It's really good to have people joining, not only from our near neighbour area in Surrey, but also much further afield. Otherwise, I think it really just comes down to me to thank once again Steve for taking the trouble to give us his talk, and also to my co-panelists Samantha, Richard and Michael for fielding questions, and not forgetting Colin Cunningham, who has been the producer of today's event. So we do hope to see you again, and for today, that's all. Thank you very much.